after the initial awakening of what you are, you start experiencing more and more happiness. Prior to the awakening, happiness seemed to come and go and was very seldom. And after the initial awakening, there's an experience of more and more happiness. And that which is seen to come and go is who you think you are. It's the character that's coming and going. Happiness does not come and go. Happiness is always here. Who you think you are is coming and going. So it feels like there's a switch that's made. That prior to the awakening, you think yourself to be this character that is trying to achieve or get happiness, to be happy. And the happiness is very seldom. It seems like it's coming and going or slipping through your fingertips. And then there's this kind of shift that's made, that then there's more and more happiness and less of who you think you are. Because who you think you are is like the opposite of happiness. And you start seeing very clearly that when you are happy, when you are experiencing happiness, you are not experiencing who you think you are. When there's happiness, there's no you, the character, you, the separate self. There's just happiness. And when there's a lot of you, who you think you are, the character, there's no happiness. It's like they're opposites. So you start experiencing more and more happiness, and you're not thinking. Because who you think you are is a thought that's being supported by other thoughts, feelings, and sense perceptions. It's like an activity that makes itself feel like it's this separate entity. But it's always moving. If you look at it very closely, it's always moving and changing and morphing. And as long as this is going on, then you're not experiencing the happiness of your true nature, the happiness that you are. So after the initial awakening, there's less and less interest in this separate entity that's a mind-made sense of self. There's less interest. There's less attention being given to it. So it just kind of dissolves and starts to fizzle. It doesn't really show up as much. And it seems to dissolve, and what's left is the happiness that's always here. But it's a happiness not for someone. That true happiness is not personal. There's no one there to claim the happiness and own it and hold on to it. There's just happiness. So you start noticing that there's more and more happiness. And the happiness is kind of broken up by when there's this, again, the mind-made sense of self, the strong identification It's like the character shows up to spoil the happiness. And you'll start noticing that this character starts showing up around certain people where the mind identification is strong, where there's still a lot of karma, where there's still a lot of story and identification and roles and identities. And you start seeing how these relationships are really supporting this character, that it's all very interconnected. But it's not really a problem, because the more you are simply resting in yourself as that happiness, this mind-made sense of self starts dissolving more and more. That without the attention, without the interest and the attention that you give to it, it cannot survive. But it will do everything, it will appear this way, that it does everything it can to preserve itself, using fear and worry and sadness and all these different shame and blame. It'll use all these different tactics to try and preserve itself. But it can't preserve itself without a past and a future. And if you look very closely, those times when you're happy, there is no past and future. There's just the happiness, the present moment. That the happiness is the present moment. So what seems to preserve that sense of self is the goals, the expectations, the projections in the future, or the memories of the past. That's what maintains it. And without the interest in digging up the past memories, without the interest of creating the goals, that sense of self starts dissolving very fast. Because you're no longer identifying with the mind. You're no longer valuing that story, the story of you, the story of who you think you are, I should say. Because there's almost like a point of no return, that once you start becoming so used to the happiness that you are, that you're content for no reason, you're at peace, you're experiencing love, you're free, you don't trade it for anything. You don't trade it for anything. It almost feels like kind of the mind comes knocking on your door. Hey, you want to give me some attention? It's like, nope, I'm good. I'm good. I'm good without you and your stories and your problems and your conflict and your drama. I'm good. But it's almost like a breakup at the start after the initial awakening, because you're so used to giving it attention and being interested by it that it's just a habit that you preserve it You start identifying with it. You get pulled into the story. You start creating more story. You get pulled into the future. You get pulled into the past. And it takes you away from you, the happiness. But it's when you start really seeing clearly. And this clarity comes from just simply resting in yourself. Yourself as the pure awareness, the pure happiness. Not yourself as the character. You can't rest as the character. Because the character is always moving from past to future. The character always is maintaining the story. Who are you without your story? Who are you without your past? Who are you without your future? Who are you without your goals and ambitions? You see, it starts falling apart so quickly. Because without all those things, you don't know who you are. But it's actually when you strip down all those things that are non-essential that you're left with that which is essential. And that's when you realize what you truly are. And you realize that you don't need all those things. You don't need to constantly be thinking. You don't need all the goals and desires and ambitions. You don't need the story. You don't need the past. You don't need the future. You don't need all of that. They're non-essential. Non-essential means not needed. They're not necessary. And it becomes your direct experience that you're actually happy without those non-essentials. That you only believed that you needed them to exist. But you realize that they can't exist without you. You exist without them. You exist without a past and a future. The true you. You exist without a story. You exist without thinking. You exist without mind, body. But this needs to be seen very clearly, experientially. So it's really this transitioning, you could say, after that initial awakening, where I don't know how long it takes. It's different for everyone, you could say. I said it depends on how strong the mind identification really was to begin with. Like I said, it's very much like an addiction. How addicted were you to thinking prior to the initial awakening? Because when you get a glimpse, you get your first initial awakening, you realize that you aren't your thoughts, that you exist without thoughts, that you aren't the character. But if you're so used to it, it's like you go back to it. Let me just see this whole character thing, how it plays out. I'll wake up later. Let me just go back to the dream. Let me just get a couple more goals, and then I'll I'll retire. Right? Once you start seeing very clearly that that whole illusionary character is nothing but problems, nothing that is the suffering, that it takes you away from your happiness. Sounds like that. It's not really how it is, because nothing can take you away from your happiness, because you are the happiness that you are seeking. But as long as that's not clear, then you always seem to be, yeah, well, let me go out there and do that goal so then I can be happy. See? You're overlooking that you're overlooking that you are the happiness. You're projecting it out there. Just go to the source of that projection. If it's projecting it somewhere into the future, then where's it coming from? Oh, it's right here. It's me. So it's making you chase it. You know, that's why it always feels like it's just a little further. If you go to the source of it, that's it. No more chasing happiness. You discover the source of happiness. And there's no difference between the source of happiness and that which you are. See you in the next one.